The 3 ways to get through a divorce. So this is I'm talking about the procedural ways to get through divorce. I'm not talking about attorneys. I'm not talking about using me or doing it yourself. I'm talking about the 3 processes because you guys keep doing these defaults without agreements and you're getting your judgments rejected and you keep hiring me, and that's fine. I appreciate it. But those of you trying to do your own divorce, let me tell you the way you want to do it. So the three types of divorce cases: default without an agreement, default with an agreement, uncontested. Okay. Now I'm going to go over those specifically. Default with agreement. First of all, let me clear the words for you. What does default mean? Default simply means the respondent did not file a response. So default without agreement is no response was filed and no agreements being reached. So when that happens, you're not submitting a settlement agreement because there's no agreement, right? You can't draft a settlement agreement because the respondent isn't signing it, either because they're not participating at all intentionally, or what's mostly happening is you're thinking it's easier to not involve your spouse. And so you're trying to do a default without an agreement. And I'll tell you, for the 18th zillionth time, it's the most difficult case to get through the court. There's a special way it has to be done because now it becomes highly technical, highly procedural, and you don't want to do it. And whenever people call me, say, Tim, I'm getting rejected judgment. Can you take over my case? Yes. So is your spouse cooperative? Yes. Are you amicable? Yes. I look at their paperwork and I say, well, why haven't they done their disclosures and why aren't they signing the settlement agreement? They said, oh, well, I didn't think I needed to involve them. Yes, you want to involve them. If you do the default without an agreement, it has to be filed a certain way. You don't get to make decisions. You have to divide all your property equally. The or the judgment needs to match the terms of what you put in the petition and nothing else. It's very strict. I took on a case today. He said, and he told me, I told him, hey, send me your paperwork first. I need to see, based on how you filed your petition, if I can push this through as a default without an agreement, because the spouse wasn't cooperative, wasn't participating, but they weren't responding or fighting it. And so when I looked at his paperwork, fortunately, he did his petition and financial disclosures good enough to where I could submit his judgment without the spouse needing to sign off on it. So, but in most cases, what you're going to want to do is a default with a written agreement. So listen, folks, to this, because this is going to change your world if you're having your judgment rejected. Even if you've already filed and you were trying to have your default without an agreement pushed through, even if you filed the default and your judgment's been rejected, and you say, and you're listening to this and you're saying, so you're telling me, Tim, that I can now turn this from a default without an agreement to a default with an agreement? And the answer is yes. You just look at the checklist for default with an agreement. There's a couple of forms the respondent needs to sign. They do not need to file a response. Still a default. Remember I told them again, default, no response filed. So it's just you're having an agreement, a settlement agreement attached that your spouse will sign, plus some other procedural forms that your spouse will sign, and that will then slide right through, barring all the other mistakes you guys normally make. But that will not be the reason, because of it being the procedural type of case you're trying to submit. And the third one is uncontested. Uncontested means a petition was filed and the respondent filed a response. Keep in mind, just because a response was filed does not necessarily mean that your spouse does not agree to the divorce. It's just them making a formal appearance in the case. As much as I preach to my clients that we don't file responses for our clients, the reason I do that is for the sole purpose of saving them money. Filing the response triggers that second $435 court filing fee. I think a lot of people aren't aware of that because, they'll say, this will come in a couple of fashions. One, we've already filed and paid our fees, and I filed the response, and I'll look, and the response was rejected because they didn't include the filing fee. And they said, oh, I didn't know there was a second fee. So we purposely don't have our clients file a response. We do the default with agreement, which is identical to uncontested, but for no response being filed. So it's just kind of the middle ground. It's an agreement, but you don't have to pay that second fee to file the response.